I guess the first question is, I would ask you guys, maybe start with you, Mike, is how bad is it right now?
How bad is the cyber threat?
Yeah.
It's bad and getting worse every day, and it will continue to get worse for the foreseeable future.
It will continue to get worse for the foreseeable future.
We're more connected, we're more dependent, we've become digitally dependent, and there's value in the digits, and whether you're a criminal or a nation state or someone who wants to change the world order, there's great opportunity to go after to either steal the information or the value or degrade or destroy the information for some purpose. So it could have a pretty sinister outlook for us.
Do you think the developments of the last couple of years, or at least the last year, where the public's attention has been so taken with this idea that, there is a set of things going on that they didn't realize, maybe combined with Russia's, invasion or whatever you want to call it with the Crimea, puts us in a new level of risk?
Yes, to answer your question, yes, a new level of risk. Now, what do I mean by that? The information that Snowden has alleged that many in the public have accepted as ground truth, which is not in fact truth, has created a perception that is going to be detrimental to our intelligence capability. Perhaps more importantly, what Snowden has compromised is basically a recipe for anyone we would target for a national security purpose to basically take the information away from us. Let me give you an analogy. In World War II, engaging with the British, we were successful in breaking Nazi Germany's command code. So we were reading their field orders before the German field commanders. That was so precious, we put an elaborate security blanket around it so that we wouldn't compromise that, because if it was known to the Germans, they could take it away from us. So this is the equivalent of having compromised that capability in World War II.
Wow. Well, if it's that bad, Art, do we have the tools to stop it, to fight it back? I mean, how do we fight back?
So what you need is a little perspective on why it's as bad as it is. And Mike was alluding to it, but let me put a finer point on it. The attack surface has increased monumentally in the last 6 or 7 years. And it's the adoption of mobile technology. The iPhone didn't even exist before 2007. Now we have full mobile ubiquity. You look at web-based applications. In 2007, we were still primarily doing client-server, ERP, and CRM. Now, web applications have taken over, and we're on a march to big data applications, measuring everything about us and the world around us. Just think of the ramifications of just those two elements on the expansion of the footprint that our adversaries can take advantage of.
In other words, the footprint of risk.
Exactly, yeah. Exactly. So over that period of time, over the last 6 or 7 years, I have seen a technology gap develop. In other words, technology vendors' ability to meet the new demands around the expanded attack surface have not kept up with that very expansion.
I mean, we've always talked about this arms race between the attackers and the defenders, right?
Right.
So is that another way of saying that right now the attackers are winning in that arms race?
There's absolutely no question. It's not that they're winning. We've made it easier for them.
We've expanded the target.
Yeah, and I mean, think about trying to defend a perimeter that's 1 mile around. Now expand it to 500 miles. With the same old-fashioned kind of tools. There's no way you can defend that perimeter. In other words, breaches are probable, if not inevitable. So the game has to shift to being able to detect that people have gotten inside and respond quickly enough to minimize the damage. And those technologies only started coming online just this past year.
Specifically, what are you referring to?
I'm talking about our equivalent of security big data applications.
So to use it back to our advantage.
Exactly.
This increased footprint.
To be able to assimilate vast volumes of data, correlate and analyze them fast enough to see that faint signal that an attack is underway. Because at some point in the process, the attacker does have to do something anomalous. And if you have enough data covering it, then you'll be able to detect it.
That's very interesting.
David, I just wanted to add one other perspective to the comments that Art's making. And a few years ago, I was talking with Henry Kissinger, And we're talking about a threat, and I was the threat guy, so I was describing what it was and how it would change. And he had a very interesting comment. He said Gutenberg, and I'm a little surprised. And
He's a history guy. We
he
know
said
that.
Gutenberg, and I looked at him sort of puzzled, with a puzzled look. He said, Gutenberg invented the printing press, and it took 200 years to change the world. He said, you're describing a technology that's changed us in less than a generation. And our policy, our laws, our framework, our institutions are not yet capable of dealing with this. So I think when you look at our legislative infrastructure, responsibilities and so on, and how businesses will have to adjust, how the government will have to adjust, we haven't had that debate yet to get that put our house in order for that part of it. I also agree with what Art is describing, that there's a huge technology gap between what has been invented and how you would be able to protect it through better and improved technology.
Well, let's segue slightly to the question of institutional change. You know, and I'd love you both to weigh in on this, both in terms of how, I mean, the tools are one thing, and I love the idea of big data as a defensive tool. A lot to say there. But what about the cultural change that we need to see in companies, maybe in government, maybe in society? I mean, what do you think about that?
Well, there's just a number of ways to start to address that question. Let me do it on kind of a micro basis and look at it around security. We've had a model for protecting our infrastructures that was reactive. You find a hole and you plug that hole. It was also perimeter based. You heard what I just said about the expansion of the attack surface. So
yeah.
Perimeter defenses are next to useless. The kinds of controls we used were siloed. They didn't add value to one another. There's no context that is given. So you have to change the model. And quite frankly, people are still operating with this old reactive model.
But isn't it even more important to change the mindset? I mean, or maybe the mindset is changing. And you know, Mike, if you've got thoughts on this too, I'm eager to know, are companies worried enough, I guess, and is Washington, regulators, laws, are all these things appropriately positioned to do the best we can do to defend ourselves?
Yeah, let me just take it up a level. So what you're now seeing, because of the sheer number of breaches and sheer number of incidents, is boards of directors and C-level executives are now coming to grips with the fact that there's a serious problem.
Right.
They don't quite know how to solve it. They don't quite understand it fully, but they know there's a problem. That's the first step in solving it. The security guys, the sophisticated ones, are moving to what we call more of an intelligence-driven model for security that starts with a better understanding of risk in the first place. Instead of trying to protect the perimeter, let's think about what's important enough to protect. Then also, let's think about who's likely to attack us and how might they come at us. So the combination of greater awareness and at least the beginning of understanding at the C-level and board of directors, combined with new thinking around models for security, is going to turn the tide, but we're at the very early stages of that happening.
Now, Mike, I know that you do a lot of talking also with boards of directors and CEOs. Has there begun to be a shift?
Yes, very definitely. They're beginning to understand. We're not there yet. I think the analogy that I would make is to what the military went through late 80s, early 90s. If you remember, let me go back to Desert Storm. Remember those vivid scenes when all of a sudden there was one target, one bomb destroyed, it was over. That was what the military called a revolution in military affairs. Three things happened. First, sensors could find something within a foot in the Earth's surface. Weapons with precision could strike that target. The difference in that conflict, one bomb, one target. World War II, 500 bombs for a single target. So
just because the inaccuracy was so much greater. It was just less accurate.
Exactly. And the other dimension is time. What the military had to invent was a way to make decisions in time. Sometimes it's more important not to strike than to strike. So how would you do that? So they developed a command and control infrastructure to do that. When I roll that over to industry today, there's more accuracy in understanding what Art was describing, seeing what threats out there. We're not fully mature, but we're getting better. There's more precision in how we would mitigate if you know, but we haven't yet addressed at all the time dimension of how do you go from the back room to the boardroom? How does the CEO and the general counsel and the risk officer, have they experienced one of these things where they're going to have to be faced to make decisions in time? It has product implications, it has legal implications, it has regulatory implications. So all of that process is going to have to be worked out. We'll have to have experience.
But you do feel that boards are getting worried, at least, and that's progress.
I spoke to the Financial Services Roundtable last fall, and I think I received probably 10 requests. These are the largest financial institutions in the country, for me to come have a dialogue, just sit down like this for an hour, hour and a half, and just give them some background on what is it and how should they think about it and so on. And I think Art and I, we've done this a couple of times together, we wind up from different perspectives describing the same phenomenon. You got to get ahead of it. It's dynamic. The old perimeter defense that you used to think about won't work. Compliance does not equal security. This is very dynamic, and you need a professional team, and you need to think about it and rehearse it to be able to respond.
So, Art, I mean, there's so many things to take up, pursue this, but I mean, maybe back to the weapons again a little bit. I love the idea that you mentioned before of big data as a defensive tool. Are there others of these new things that on the one hand make us more vulnerable that we can turn to our advantage? I mean,
Yeah, that's a great question. So virtualization technology, for example.
Something you all like at EMC, I know.
Exactly. It is enabling us to get tremendous economies out of our existing hardware infrastructure. So this tremendous consolidation of data centers. We're moving to software-defined data centers and even software-defined networks. So we're collapsing physical infrastructure. Most people view that as a possible single point of failure, and it drives a big concern. But what they don't realize is we can take advantage of the virtualization technology to create security controls and to implement policies that would be impossible to do in the physical world, and we're starting to do those very things.
Using the virtualization technology itself?
Yes, because you can, by policy, every time you create a virtual machine, have a control go with it. Now compare that to the physical world where you have to physically implement a control in every single physical location where you have a piece of hardware. You don't have to do that in a virtual infrastructure. The other thing is you can see a lot more in a virtual infrastructure if you have the right sensing capabilities and bring that together far more quickly, again, than in a physical environment.
So in a sense, just the sheer scale of the new infrastructures and the kind of compression and density of the scale of the new data centers means that maybe another way to look at it is you can afford to put more effort into the defense of that center than you could if it was a whole bunch of little ones. Is that part of it?
Yeah, I mean, I phrase it this way. Instead of a single point of failure, I call it a single point of focus. And then using the technology in your favor, you end up with a much, much tighter security infrastructure.
You can achieve scale and operate inside the timeline because you do it in software, and you start to achieve things like access control. I mean, that's very important.
Yeah.
Things like if there's some inappropriate downloading of information that can be flagged. So it gets you to a place where you can have a much higher level of confidence and think about encrypting the data that's at rest. You know, one of the things that we've always thought about way back in the past is you encrypt data when it was in motion, going from point A to point B. And when it got to wherever it was going, it was to be decrypted, put on a piece of paper, and put in a file cabinet. So everybody wanted to break in to get the information from the file cabinet in the old days. Well, when we started to have data at rest that was unencrypted and unprotected, anybody could reach in and take it. So technologies are being developed to encrypt it while it's at rest. And so you achieve a much higher level of security and control through this virtualization that Art's describing.
That's very interesting. So let's sort of try to sum it up, and I'm going to ask you to both address what is the one thing that you think most companies least understand that they need to really focus on?
Actually, it's not technology, it's risk. Mike and I were at a similar event a while ago, and I asked the CIOs in the audience to raise their hand if they thought they did a really good job understanding and assessing risk in their infrastructures.
The CEOs?
CIOs.
CIOs, yeah.
And not a single hand went up
Oh.
in the audience. And the issue is this is hard because it's a qualitative exercise. And what we don't do is we don't push the evaluation of risk enough outside of the IT infrastructure people and to the business people. It has to be a coordinated effort. It has to be at a more granular level than we would have ever thought before if we're really going to get our arms around it.
So Mike, what's the one thing you'd like to see businesses thinking more about?
Understanding that risk
Yeah.
and being willing to engage. I'll give you an anecdote. When I started to push this noodle when I was back in government back in 2007, and I went up to my oversight committee in the Senate, and I started to talk about cybersecurity as a big issue. We need to think about it. And the answer was, whoa, are you talking about computers? I said, well, yes. I said, well, you need to understand. We'll have to get my grandson in here to talk about computers.
Oh, no.
The little
That,
blue,
luckily, those days I hope are past.
the little blue light on my VHS is still blinking. That's what I know about
These are senators.
Yes.
Oh.
And now remember, most of them are older than I am, and I'm 70. so there's
They'll be
there's-
happy to hear that, Mike.
well, there's a gap between the current need and the understanding. The point.
But that was a few years ago. Luckily.
It was a few years ago, and because of some of these breaches and things that have happened most recently, it's beginning to be understood. But to accept it as a risk and to engage personal time of CEOs and risk officers and general counsels to understand it, not just say, well, that's a technology issue. They need to understand compliance does not equal security. This is a dynamic problem, and you have to be very agile in how you address it.
Wow. Well, thank you both. Really great discussion. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks.